Oh, yeah, got the.
Hi everyone, I'm here with Jamie Allen today. Hi Jamie.
Hello.
We have to thank Jamie quite a lot because he's actually already done this. We did it on Wednesday, excuse me, and I failed to broadcast it properly. So sorry about that, Jamie, and thanks so much for coming back.
That's okay. You get to do it twice.
Yeah. Well, there's no excuse for me not knowing what you've been talking about now, is there?
No.
So I should be an expert. We'll wait and see. So Jamie is a professional photographer, and you're also a drone operator and trainer.
That's right. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more about that, Jamie, and what your business does.
Well, the business is primarily a photography and videography business, but I also train people on the drone legislation. If anybody wants to get their commercial license, it's not a license, but that's generally the term for it as well.
Okay, and there's quite a lot of restrictions about using drones around about, isn't there? You have to apply for permits, and is that right?
Yeah, you have to get a permission from the Civil Aviation Authority to actually make money from the drones. But anybody can buy one and just use it as a hobbyist and take photographs for their own use. That's absolutely fine.
Okay, so where are you based, and what kind of areas do you cover?
I'm in Bishopbriggs, but I cover anywhere in Scotland. I think the furthest we've been so far is up to sort of Inverness Way, Loch Ness, that kind of stuff.
Right, yeah. I've seen some of your videos up there of the dam, I think it was. It was beautiful. It was amazing. So you've kindly offered to give us some tips on how to take the perfect photograph.
Yep.
And I'm sure a lot of people are looking forward to this after we didn't make it on Wednesday. So hopefully they tune back in, or if not, they can catch us on replay. So just run ahead with it then. What's your tip number one, Jamie?
Well, the tip number one, we're going to be talking about, and I know everybody uses their mobile phones, but I'm going to be talking about a normal DSLR camera that we've got here. Okay. This is my little workhorse. But there's three key things that people need to worry about if they want to get off the auto mode.
Okay.
They are aperture, shutter speed, and the exposure and the ISO value.
Now, what's the benefits of not using the auto, Jamie?
You can just get different effects, and you've got more control over how much light goes onto the sensor and how your photograph looks. So if you want to take a bit more control of your photographs and what you're going to edit afterwards, then it's worth looking at the different settings on the cameras.
Right, okay. So these three key points then, aperture, exposure, and shutter speed, how do they, what are they each individually, and how do they all affect one another?
Well, if you think about the camera like is your eye, okay, so the aperture is how wide the sensor, or how wide the aperture is, depends on how much light comes in. So think of if you're in the dark, your pupil on your eye goes really, really wide. Yeah, so that's like a very small f-stop number, they call it. So the lower the number, the wider the aperture, which means more light will come in to the sensor.
Okay.
And obviously the higher number, the smaller the sensor, smaller the aperture, less light comes in. So you can balance that out to get different effects. And the depth of field changes as well. So if you want to get a nice photograph of a portrait of you being in focus and the background all out of focus and nice and blurry, then you just use a very small f number, which is a tiny, tiny field depth of field, and it blurs everything behind you.
Okay, right. So that's good for when I'm doing lifestyle photographs in a home, for example, and we're wanting to focus on a feature and kind of blur the background.
Yeah. So you can focus on a specific thing and everything else will be blurry, and then you just you balance it out to whatever you want it to look like.
Right, okay. Exposure, sorry, that was the next
exposure is just how much light is physically hitting the sensor as well. So you've got to control that with the aperture and the shutter speed, and you can do kind of compensation on most of the cameras as well. And people might be aware from the old 35mm reels, you got something called ISO as well, which is how sensitive the film or the sensor is to light. So again, if you're bright sunshine, you're going to want potentially a small aperture, fast shutter speed, and a low ISO, because you don't want too much light that will overexpose and blow out the photograph.
Right.
Okay. So exposure is quite important. You can, if you blow out the exposure, too much exposure, you lose all that information. So a good tip, I suppose, is to underexpose your photographs and then try and lift them when you do the post-production in the editing suites.
Okay. And shutter speed.
Shutter speed is, again, thinking about your eye, how quickly you blink. All right, so if you've got a bright sunny day and you've got a really wide aperture because you've got so you want a small depth of field to make something nice and nice and in focus and blurry in the background, you want a really, really fast shutter speed to stop too much light coming in. All right, so up at sort of 1/4000th of a second, something like that. Very, very quick. So sport, anything dynamic. If you want to freeze that frame, you need a high shutter speed. But if you want long exposure, like at night time, or whether you're filming, taking photographs of water and you want to get that nice smooth marbled effect, you can use a long exposure. You can use the long exposure, and it can go on for minutes and hours and things like that as well.
Right. Okay.
And it just lets tons and tons of light in. So it's good for astrophotography.
Yeah, I've seen a few recently, long exposure, and real estate agents using it as well. Just seems to be to get a huge amount of detail in the picture. Would that be right? That's what they're doing, is it? Is it long exposure?
Yeah. Well, when we do our property photos, some of the times, some of the photographs that I take from those are done with long exposures, especially if the room is quite dark and there's not a lot of natural light coming in. You can do a long exposure, brings more light in, and it actually makes the room brighter.
Okay.
But then you have to compensate then for the windows, because obviously the windows will be overexposed.
Right.
So kind of take two photographs, one for the window, one for the room, and then stitch them together in the editing software.
Really? Right. Okay. Gosh, I always wondered why the editing process seemed to be so lengthy. I thought it was a little bit of touching up light and things like that. There's obviously quite a lot involved in it.
There is quite a lot. If you think about the shadows in your rooms, if you want to try and get rid of all the shadows, you've got to expose for each of those areas and then stack the photographs up and then work out which ones and then remove the shadows from certain bits. Right. So it's an even exposure and it looks all good across the whole room.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks very much. Okay, so Diane, the rule of thirds.
Yeah, so this is just basically about composing a good photograph, and it doesn't matter what the photograph looks when you take it. You can always edit it later on, but when you're out taking photographs, even on your mobile phone, if you set up grid lines, there's grid lines called rules of third, and I'll show you what I mean if I do this.
Okay.
Here we go. So you should be able to see a picture of the mountains.
Yeah.
From now. Okay, so if we wanted to make the hotel the focus of the film, the photograph, this is the rule of thirds. Okay, so everything's broken up into thirds, obviously, and then if we put the focus on one of those grid lines, it changes the composition completely. So if we can crop it in and then just so we line it up. If you're doing portrait photography or things like that, if you get people's eyes on one of the lines, it kind of changes the composition slightly, makes it a bit more interesting. And then you can just crop in and I can move things around to get any sort of interesting information that I want. And then you can just play around with it.
Okay, so it's really about the positioning of objects within the photo, isn't it? Would that be right? And
yeah. Yeah, that's the basic rule they talk about as the rule of thirds. If you can line up the subject on the lines, on the crossings of the lines, and that's a good tip. Make things a bit more interesting if you've got something in the foreground and something in the background as well.
Right.
Just which can be blurred out, which depends on your depth of field. It just makes things a bit more interesting for people to look at.
Yeah. So, I mean, the natural thing is always to think that you put whatever it is you're photographing in the center, isn't it?
Yeah, sometimes that works, but it depends on what kind of thing you're photographing, really.
Yeah, it's probably not the most professional thing to do. That just naturally, that's what I would probably do. But I think
I mean, if you're doing headshots for people, then that works quite nicely. A big scene like that I just showed you probably needs a bit of editing just to show. You can focus basically your eye focuses in onto what is obviously the focus of the picture if you use that technique.
Okay, Great. And what is your third tip then?
The third tip was all about editing. Really, that that photograph I just showed you was fairly poor, to be fair.
And where was that one, Jamie?
The one that's up on the screen, as you can see now, that's actually at Luss, up on Loch Lomond.
Yeah, it is quite dark.
It is quite dark, but this I just wanted to one, I wanted to show you about the rule of thirds, and two, I wanted to show you about the editing. So the editing the photographs afterwards is pretty key, really, but it depends on. I'll just get rid of that. It also depends on what file type you use when you shoot your photographs. And again, you're limited to what you can do on the mobile phone. But if you've got a decent, big enough camera, okay, you should have the option to shoot in either JPEG or RAW file formats. And all that means is JPEG is just a normal picture file, quite small, not a lot of information in there, but that's what you get off your phone. If you can shoot in RAW, you get tons more information to play with.
Okay, and is that RAW?
RAW, yeah.
Right,
yeah.
okay.
So you just get lots more information to play with. So as an example, one I prepared earlier. So this photograph of Luss, like I said, was quite poor because it was it's really, really dark, but it was shot from the drone. It was shot from the drone and in RAW. So you can see it's quite dark, but you should be able to see these sliders over here on the right-hand side.
Yeah.
And this is Photoshop. Well, this is Lightroom actually. So this is a free app that you can get. There's loads of other free apps out there that you can use, but this is the one that I've got a subscription for. So this is just the one that I use.
Okay.
So you can see how dark that is now, but you can play around with all these sliders, and because it's shot in RAW, it actually brings out tons and tons of information. So I can lighten it up. I can play with all these different sliders, just move them around. I can change the colors.
Oh, right. Okay. Yes, you can actually see buildings now before it.
You can do all that. I mean, it's quite noisy. Depending how much you do, you can get a bit of noise, a bit of grain in there, which makes it look, well, depends on what your taste is like, really. But even just a couple of moves of the slider, and you can get some quite dramatic results. So yeah, that you can just go around and do that, and then all it is just playing around with things. So there's even just a couple of slider moves, and that's the kind of stuff you can get.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, the sky's totally changed.
Yeah, the sky's totally changed. You can do some other ones. There's if you get a bit more advanced with things and you get into Photoshop, proper Photoshop, you can do lots of interesting things, changing the skies, all sorts of things like that. It's really quite clever.
And is this the free software that you're using, Jamie, or is that one that you subscribe to?
Right. Sorry, he's bugging me. No, I subscribe to Photoshop, right. So I pay a subscription because I use. Right, go sit over.
Yeah, because you're a pro, so you need the best.
Yeah, I subscribe to it because I use it quite a lot, obviously. But I pay, so I pay a subscription for that every month, which is for the video editing as well as the photograph editing and various other bits and pieces. Okay. But if you just Google free editing software, you'll come up with a few of the Adobe programs, as well as, well, there's tons and tons of other things up there as well that you can use.
You mentioned Lightroom there. Is that something that's free, or is that part of the...
Yeah, so this is the one I just showed you was Lightroom. That's a very it's not basic. You can actually do quite a lot of stuff in there. As just with the photograph, you can't do composites in Lightroom. You need Photoshop for that. But yeah, you can get that as a free app, okay. And then just use the sliders. Even the very, very basic stuff that's on your phone is actually quite useful.
Okay. So we'll pop that in the comments below then at the end, Lightroom. Yeah. People can look that up if they want to.
Yeah. But if you want to get a little bit more advanced about things, and you want to have a look at something like Photoshop, Photoshop proper, which is kind of like the industry standard. Mm-hmm. All right. So again, this is up on Loch Lomond from sort of late last year. But it's, again, just a little bit of a drab photograph. The boats aren't really in line, mm-hmm. or anything like that. And just a couple of button clicks later, wow. You can change it to be a bit more dramatic. So a completely different sky. The boats now line up a little bit better. Yeah. So it takes a little bit of time to get used to it, but you can get some fantastic results with them. And it's quite good fun. You can do that with the videos and graphics and all sorts of stuff as well with the same packages.
Yeah, it's amazing what you can do now. I just had a question about the camera that you had there, Jamie. Yep. What did you say it was?
This is a Sony, one of the Sony A series. It's an A6300.
Right. Okay.
Which is it's a 24 megapixel camera. So megapixels just say what the resolution is like, but it's not the be all and end all about thing. You want to worry about the sensor size of what you've got in the camera.
Right. So if somebody was starting out and they're looking for the first kind of upgrade, decent camera, what would they be looking for then? What sensor size should they be trying to
get? Depends what they want to do. This one was quite quite affordable. Some of the full frame things, which are a bit chunkier, and what people would think about a proper professional camera, they could be up to £1,000, £2,000 quite easily. But anything above sort of 8-10 megapixels will take a decent enough photograph if it's got a decent enough size sensor on it. You can blow that up to poster size without too much problem.
And what about lenses? Do they need to buy lenses on top of that?
Yeah, you can do. This one is one of those ones where you can take off the lenses and do various things. So different lenses do different jobs. Lenses can be expensive. This is the one that I use mostly when we do our property photographs, because it's got a really wide field of view, so you can get all the room in one photograph. Different lenses do different things, and they're all different prices as well.
Yeah. Okay.
Markedly different.
Right. Okay. Well, that's been great. Thanks very much, Jamie.
Okay.
Now, to thank Jamie for his time, and considering he has done this twice now through no fault of his own, please go over to @BlueGiraffe Imaging and give him a like. Now, Jamie, you had a freebie, didn't you, on offer for people who've watched today or watch on replay over the next couple of days?
Yeah, that's right. Basically, if anybody wants to come across and like the page, then brilliant, that'd be great. And any of the new likes, or anybody that likes the page at all, if they've got a photograph that they would like editing in some way, or if they'd like photoshopping into a certain scenario, for example, then we can I can help them out with that kind of stuff.
Brilliant.
So I will pick. I won't be able to do everybody's, obviously, but I'll pick a couple and edit a couple up for people, or if they just want to chat about things, then they're quite welcome to give us a phone call.
That's brilliant. Okay, that sounds fantastic. Thanks very much, Jamie. I'm sure that will be well received. So that page again is @BlueGiraffe Imaging, and I will pop it in the comments above. Just give me a few minutes once this finishes, and I'll get all the details in there on the post. But thanks for coming in, Jamie.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Speak to you soon.
Okay, bye.
Bye.